Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to KSP Made Easy. In today's episode, we're going to be learning some simple astronavigation tools and use them to finally fly to both of Kerbin's moons. Come and join me in the VAB and I'll show you what I had in mind for your first moon rocket.
Coming into the vehicle assembly building, we're going to design a rocket with a few simple objectives. One, it has to have enough fuel to fly to the Mun and Minmus and enter orbit around either one. It has to carry a pilot and all of the current scientific instruments that we have unlocked, and it must return and land back on Kerbin. It is broken up into 5 separate parts: the crew module, the service propulsion module, which contains the science experiment package, the main launch vehicle, and then attached alongside the main launch vehicle are the liquid radial boosters. The crew module is made up of the Mercury crew capsule, a heat shield, a science collection pod, and a parachute. The science collection pod is a new part that we have unlocked that allows us to gather all of our scientific data and store it directly in that pod, so we don't have to EVA the Kerbal for any longer than we need to, and can just use the scientist to reset our the materials bay and the mystery goo experiment. The science experiment package is made up of a materials bay, 1 barometer, 1 thermometer, and 2 mystery goo experiments that are attached directly to the crew cabin by a standard decoupler. The main propulsion system for the service propulsion module is made up of an FLT 400 fuel tank and the Terrier liquid fuel engine. It is attached directly to the science module, and it contains enough fuel to go anywhere in the Kerbin system from low Kerbin orbit. The main launch vehicle is made from 3 FLT 400 fuel tanks and a standard swivel engine. It is designed to kick the main spacecraft into a low suborbital flight that the service propulsion engine can use to put the vehicle into low Kerbin orbit for a parking orbit around Kerbin. It is attached with a decoupler to the service propulsion module. The vehicle then, of course, has the 2 liquid fuel rocket boosters, known as the liquid radial booster assembly. They are designed to help the vehicle start its journey into space. It is made with either 2 FLT 400 liquid fuel tanks and a swivel engine with an aerodynamic cap, or can also be made with 2 FLT 200 fuel tanks and an FLT 400 and a swivel engine and an aero cap. Both versions have virtually the same amount of fuel and are attached using the radial decouplers. Guidance fins are attached to the main launch vehicle to help guide the rocket in atmosphere. Before we head out to the launch pad, it's going to be pretty important that we check our staging so that way we make sure everything is where it needs to be. The boosters should ignite first right away at liftoff, then after booster separation, the main launch vehicle engine, and then after the launch vehicle separation, the main engine. We're going to fly the rocket just as we learned in the first video. We'll roll our vehicle towards the 90-degree vector mark on the nav ball. Then we'll pitch ourselves down so that way by the time we hit about 10 kilometers, our nose is pointing 45 degrees above the horizon. Our boosters will cut out around 5 kilometers, at which point the main launch vehicle will take over. We'll also utilize the flight data tool in the bottom left-hand corner to give us readouts for our apoapsis, or our highest point in our orbit, and our periapsis, our lowest point in our orbit. As we get higher into the atmosphere, you want to start having your rocket face closer to the horizon in order to try and push your periapsis up as fast as possible, as well as push the trajectory to kick your stage further out. So that way when the main engine cuts off, you can use the service propulsion engine, or the main engine on the spacecraft. Doesn't have to use as much fuel to get into orbit. By the time your apoapsis is out of the atmosphere, you should basically be facing at the horizon. The main launch vehicle, if you follow this flight path, should cut out around 80 to 100 kilometers, and this is the altitude that we want our apoapsis to be at in order to put our spacecraft into orbit. You can use your service propulsion engine to get your apoapsis fine-tuned down to where you actually want it, and then you simply need to coast to the apoapsis in order to burn for orbital insertion. To speed things up, we'll use the greater than or less than keys on your keyboard in order to use time warp to coast ourselves to the apoapsis. If you followed the instructions that I made in my first video, this should be relatively easy, especially if you've had a little bit more practice. But I figured I'd make a quick refresher just in case you needed it. Now we need to plan on how we're going to get to the moon. Moving your mouse along the orbital path of your spacecraft, click anywhere, and you'll have the option to either time warp to that location or plan a maneuver. We're going to hit plan maneuver, and you'll see a tool pop up. This is your orbital maneuver planning tool. It has a representation of all 6 of your orbital attitudes: prograde, retrograde, radial in, and radial out. And of course, normal and anti-normal. These icons will change the planned orbit if we click on them and drag them away from the center of the tool, allowing us to plan a burn to get us to our destination. Using this tool, click on prograde and drag it out until your apoapsis is on the planned orbit is beyond the orbit of the Mun. Not too far, but just a little beyond. Then click and drag the maneuver. Click on the center of the maneuver and drag it along your current orbit until you get an encounter with the Mun. To make this a little easier, go out, click on the Mun icon, and select it as your target. Then drag along your orbit until the 2 gray indicators get close enough together that you get an encounter with the sphere of influence of Mun. Then select Mun and make it the focus of the map view, and use the icon down in the left hand corner by clicking on the orbital maneuver icon on the top of the left hand corner indicator, and then taking the slider that you see and dragging it all the way down. You can then use that icon to adjust your orbit, so that way the periapsis around the Mun is within 20 to 10 kilometers. This is a good altitude in which to insert yourself into orbit, as it's low enough to take advantage of what is known as the Oberth effect, something that I can get into a little later, but also be above the mountains of the Mun. Now we can begin the coast. Now time warp over to your maneuver and perform that burn until it reads 0. It's good to go into the map view to check and make sure that everything looks fine and make any adjustments you need to. Then we can begin the coasting phase. If you haven't already, gather any science from space with any of the experiments that you have not gotten. Then using time warp, once again using the greater than or less than keys, time warp until you are around 1 million meters above Kerbin. Then hit the / key to stop time warp, and gather any additional scientific data, all the scientific data you can from that location as well. Making sure to have your Kerbal, who should be a scientist, reset the goo in materials bay and collect the science in the collection system in the crew capsule. Repeat this process once you cross over from Kerbin's influence to the Mun's. Then we'll move on down to the periapsis. Facing retrograde, we're going to begin burning until our apoapsis and periapsis are around the same. Congratulations, you have entered a stable orbit around another planetary body. Collect your science, enjoy the view, and get ready for the return trip home. Go into the map view and place your maneuver specifically on the Kerbin-facing side of the Mun. This side, when you burn prograde, will mean that from the reference of the Mun itself and its orbit, you are burning retrograde. So when you burn enough so that way your orbit goes beyond the sphere of influence of Mun, you will begin burning retrograde in accordance to your orbit around Kerbin, and your periapsis will drop. This is a good way to build what's called a free return trajectory. Plan your orbit so that way your periapsis is below 35 kilometers around Kerbin, but above 30 kilometers. This will ensure that you don't come in too fast on landing and break your parachute, but also that the atmosphere can be used as a brake to slow you down and bring you into a suborbital flight for a soft, safe landing. Ensure that you have all your science and then coast back to Kerbin, releasing the decoupler and pointing retrograde so your heat shield is the first thing to encounter the atmosphere. Open your parachute once it's safe and recover your vessel. Congratulations on successfully traveling to low Mun orbit. I recommend you fly that mission a couple of times, at least twice, to gather as much science as possible and to get as much practice before moving on to Minmus. In order to fly to Minmus, get your spacecraft into the same orbit that you did for the Mun, and this time select Minmus as your target. The biggest difference for Minmus is it is on an inclined orbit around Kerbin, meaning its orbit is on a different plane than Kerbin's equator. The Mun is on the same plane as Kerbin's equator, so because we went into an equatorial orbit, or an orbit that is on the same plane as the equator, we need to change the inclination of our spacecraft. To do this, we're going to find the ascending and descending nodes, create a maneuver at one of them, and use either the normal or anti-normal tools in the maneuver planner to bring the indicated inclination down to 0.0. This means that we're on the same plane as our target, and we can then plan our mission just as we did normally. By following my guidance, you should be able to unlock all of the Level 4 and Level 5 tech nodes. There's a couple of other nodes that I would recommend you unlock, particularly the Aviation in Tech Level 6, the Electric Charge specifically ones that give you the extendable solar panels in Tech Level 6, and the additional Science and Crew section in Tech Level 6 that will give you ladders and the Science Bay. All of these will be helpful for us in our next video.
I just want to thank you all again for joining me on this KSP tutorial. I've got big video projects planned and out for the near future, so keep an eye out for that announcement. As well, next week we'll be learning about space station design, orbital vehicle design, and how to rendezvous and dock in orbit. On Sundays, I plan to begin streaming regularly, although there is still some issues coming up with that. And finally, if you don't mind checking out my Patreon, where every penny that I earn there goes towards my education, which is a great way for you to support me if you want to help me become an astronaut. Along with Patreon, if you support me on Patreon, I will rename one of the Kerbals after you in my KSP playthrough, as well as give you access to a specific room on my Discord server. Links are down in the description. Thank you again for watching, and remember that the sky is not the limit, only your imagination. And now for this week in space news. The first part of the Artemis 3 Orion capsule, the spacecraft that will carry the first crewed mission to the lunar surface, has been completed by Lockheed Martin. It was assembled in South El Monte, California, and is right now on its way to NASA's Michoud Assembly Facility near New Orleans, Louisiana. There, engineers will weld it to other panels to form the Orion capsule's pressure vessel that will house the crew during their journey to the moon. The Orion project manager, Howard Hugh, is quoted as saying, "It is truly exciting to have the first piece of the Artemis 3 spacecraft completed at AMRO that will enable American astronauts to build a sustainable presence on the lunar surface." Alongside this development, a mock-up of one of the competing lunar lander concepts has been delivered to Johnson Space Center by the joint team of Blue Origin, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman. The team is designing a three-part lander, Blue Origin designing the descent stage using their Blue Moon landing system, Lockheed Martin designing the ascent stage, as well as several other companies helping to design the interior of the capsule for the ascent stage and the transfer stage elements that make up this three-part lunar lander for the Artemis mission. A link to these articles and detailing these events is in the description of the video. Go check them out if you would like to learn more.